Chapter 20. The Book Thief. Surrounded with water, the library resembled a rocky island. The similarity was even more striking because of the great number of birds which, flushed out of their regular gathering places, the nearby parks, were perching on the building's roof, cornices, and window-sills. As expected, the library's front doors were locked, but as the company inspected the rest of the building, they noticed that one of the service entrances was left open. A strip of duct tape had been pasted on the edge of the door, preventing it from shutting. The kidnappers were already there, and they were expecting Hoggie. Prospero, Scooter, and Brick each hid near one of the 3 service doors on the first floor.
"If they try to trick you,"
Prospero told Hoggie,
"just scream as loud as you can, and we'll be on top of them in a second."
With 15 minutes left until her meeting with the kidnappers, Hoggie decided to take a look around the library. It was strange to see the reading rooms completely void of people while the sun was still up. Even the guard's nook on the first floor was empty. She ascended to the second floor and surveyed the semi-dark foyer. The librarian's tables at the eastern wall had papers strewn all over them, and dozens of books were lying on the reading desks in all the rooms. Everyone, including the library staff, must have left in a hurry. Hoggie then climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. She peeped into the music room, to make sure that it too had been abandoned. She then crossed the foyer, and was about to enter Arts and History room, when a massive book cart knocked her off her feet.
"Ouch!"
Hoggie cried, landing on the floor.
"Ouch! Ouch!"
she complained, as the next instant an avalanche of books buried her momentarily.
"I'm so sorry,"
she heard from inside her burial mound. There was a sound of the paper rustling as the speaker raked away the books.
"I didn't think there was a—"
The man stopped short suddenly as Hoggie's face came into view.
"Hoggie? What are you doing here?"
Hoggie, too, recognized the man.
"Jimmy, I'm meeting someone. We agreed to meet here days ago. I couldn't cancel because the phones were dead."
Jimmy raised his eyebrows.
"That's awfully decent of you, even though they probably understand if you didn't come."
He helped Hoggie to her feet, and then began gathering the books and putting them back on the cart. Hoggie gave him a hand.
"And why are you here?"
Hoggie asked.
"Oh, I never left, Hoggie," the young man explained. "The water got into the basement, so a few of us have been here ever since, moving the books out of the stores."
Just then, Hoggie noticed that, in addition to the room's own collection, there were thousands more books stacked on its reading desks, chairs, window-sills, and even on the floor. Jimmy picked up the last book, a small brown book with no title, and handed it to Hoggie.
"This must be yours."
"Thank you,"
Hoggie said.
"No problem."
Jimmy flashed his charming pearly white smile at her.
"By the way, how did you get in?"
"The side door wasn't locked."
Jimmy clicked his tongue.
"That's not good. Anybody can just wander in. There's a lot of looting going on, and we have some really valuable books here. I better take a look at that door."
"I'll make sure it's locked when I leave,"
Hoggie promised.
"Thanks, Hoggie."
Jimmy glanced at his wrist-watch.
"Well, I'll be off to the basement, then. It was nice running into you, if a little too literally. Don't stay here too long. It's not safe."
"I won't,"
Hoggie promised. The librarian waved at her and hurried to the elevator. The room became quiet again. Hoggie took the stairs back to the science section, walked to the desk underneath the portrait of Walter Scott, and sat behind it. Time dragged by, one slow, excruciating moment after another. The minute hand of the wall clock ascended to 12, and then began to creep downward, and still Hoggie was alone in the room. At 1:15, Hoggie started to feel quite anxious. What if, she wondered, the kidnappers weren't coming at all? What if they couldn't find the means of getting across the flooded city? Worse yet, what if they drowned, or were eaten by the sharks? Hoggie imagined Aunt Michelle, tied and gagged, sitting in a locked room in the kidnapper's house, forgotten by everyone, slowly starving to death. Just then she heard footsteps. In the library's perfect silence, they reverberated like thunder on a clear summer day. Judging by the syncopated rhythm of their footsteps, the kidnappers were two. One of their gaits was strained and heavy. Thump, thump, thump. The man stomped his foot on the stone floor, as if he had weights attached to his ankles, or wore a peg-leg. Hoggy rose, her hands nervously clutching the book. The footsteps were getting louder and louder. Another instant, and two men walked into the science section. One of them had a heavy walking stick that made a sound every time the man leaned on it. Upon entering the room, the two lingered for a moment. They saw Hoggy, and one of them, the one with the walking stick, started unhurriedly towards the girl. The other remained by the door. As the man with the stick approached, Hoggy felt sweat break out on her face and palms of her hands. She held the mirror closer to her chest. The lights all over the library were off, and in the dim atmosphere of the room, Hoggy couldn't quite see the man's face, only his tall, broad-shouldered figure that looked all the more menacing because of the walking stick. But as the man came within steps of her, the sunlight fell upon his face through the window above. Hoggy gasped.
Dr. Barnaby?
"Good afternoon, Hoggy," the scholar replied.
For a few seconds, Hoggy stared at the apparition in disbelief.
"You are alive!"
she finally stated, still very much mystified.
"I am,"
the man confirmed. Just a few days ago, Hoggy would be glad to find Dr. Barnaby alive. But now, she wasn't sure this was indeed good news. For one thing, if the scholar was alive, whose body was it in the city morgue? Secondly, Hoggie and Scooter believed, for a long time now, that some mysterious gang of book thieves, the ones that broke into Catherine Libri's house, stalked Scooter and kidnapped Aunt Michelle, had also murdered Dr. Barnaby. But if Dr. Barnaby hadn't been murdered, then perhaps the gang didn't exist at all. In that case, the answer as to who was behind all those crimes was a lot more obvious, and a great deal more sinister.
"How are you, Hoggy?"
Dr. Barnaby asked, unaware of the confusion brought about by his unexpected arrival, or at least not showing it.
"I'm all right,"
Hoggy replied.
"And Scooter?"
"He is fine."
Obviously Dr. Barnaby and his partner did not know that Scooter, too, was in the library. Hoggy decided not to tell them.
"And how is your search?"
"Good. We found it. We found the secret library."
Dr. Barnaby didn't seem at all surprised.
"I always knew you would."
"We found the mirror as well."
For a few moments, the scholar's gaze lingered on the small brown book Hoggy was clutching to her chest. Hastily, she hid the mirror behind her back.
"Have you?"
Dr. Barnaby sounded doubtful.
"We have,"
Hoggy assured him.
"What's more, we know what it does."
One of Dr. Barnaby's eyebrows rose ever so slightly.
"You do?"
Hoggy met his gaze without evasion.
"The book. It is made of the leaves of a wishing tree. It can make anything you write in it come true."
For a moment or two, Dr. Barnaby's bespectacled eyes studied Hoggy with as much interest as if she herself was a strange and rare book.
"This is remarkable,"
he said at last.
"You know, some people have spent their entire lives trying to solve the mystery of the mirror. Yet they never have. I'm really quite impressed with you, Hoggy."
Hoggy was flattered, but she didn't say thanks, or blush, or even smiled. She was not about to let Dr. Barnaby talk her into giving him the book.
"Indeed,"
Dr. Barnaby carried on in the meantime.
"The book brings to life everything that is written or drawn in it. That is why it is called the mirror. It reflects the thoughts and dreams of its authors."
"How old is it?"
Hoggy couldn't help asking.
"At least 3,000 years," Dr. Barnaby replied. It is believed that the book was created in the ancient kingdom of Bactria.
Who made it?
Dr. Barnaby shrugged. We'll never know for sure, but a legend says that it was a young girl named Chino. She was the daughter of a gardener who had in his garden, along with many other trees, an old wishing tree. Many a day the girl spent under the wishing tree, covering its roots with fresh soil, picking caterpillars off its tender leaves, watering it and talking to it. By then, wishing trees had already become quite rare, and so, when the Bactrian king learned about Chino's tree, he ordered that it should be brought to his palace. Unfortunately, uprooted from its homeland, the wishing tree did not do well in the king's garden. It withered away within days. The legend also says that as the king's soldiers were unearthing the tree, Chino, standing nearby, crying bitterly over the loss of her friend, the wishing tree suddenly cast off all of its leaves. Everyone thought it rather strange that a tree should lose its foliage in the middle of spring, but it must have been the wishing tree's parting gift to the girl. After the soldiers left, Chino gathered the leaves and made a book out of them, and it turned out to be quite a remarkable book.
Hoggy reflected on the story for a few moments.
How come nobody ever wrote in it?
Who says nobody ever has?
Dr. Barnaby sat down behind the nearest desk, and leaned his walking-stick against it. Hoggy had seen this stick before, but she only now noticed that its bronze handle was shaped as the head and neck of a lion.
Thousands of years ago, when wishing trees were still quite common, people's wishes themselves were different, the scholar said musingly. They were much simpler. People wished for good health, long lives, and happiness. Then one day, and nobody knows when or why, they started wishing for money, things, and power. Most of those people didn't understand the wishing tree, just like they didn't understand the mirror. And whenever they would wish for something, they would not think of consequences of the mirror's magic. Their carelessness would bring about a lot of troubles.
Like when Alexander Libri wished for a hurricane to bring back his friend, and accidentally destroyed other people's houses and ship,
Hoggy said.
Exactly.
Dr. Barnaby gave her another long and curious look.
I see you have solved that little puzzle as well.
Hoggy nodded.
That was why the mirror was kept hidden from the world for hundreds of years, the scholar concluded. That is not to say that none of the people who ever held the mirror in their hands were tempted to use it. No. In fact, some of them did use it. I am sure you have noticed that a few pages are missing from the book.
Hoggy nodded again.
Of course, Alexander Libri, writing his wish in the mirror, was just an accident. At the time, he had no idea what the book was and what it could do. He just found it in his father's library and thought it would make a nice journal. But there was another man. Ironically, his name too was Alexander. When he came upon the mirror, in some Bactrian town, he knew exactly what it was, and so he too wrote down his wish in the book.
What did he wish for?
He wished to rule the world,
Dr. Barnaby replied. Hoggy considered this for a moment. Suddenly she guessed.
You're not talking about Alexander the Great, are you?
Indeed I am. Alexander of Macedonia wished to be the ruler of the world, and as you very well know, his wish came true. That particular wish turned out to be very dear, for in order for it to come true, thousands of people had to die and hundreds of cities were destroyed. In the end, it cost Alexander his own life.
Was this how the book ended in the Alexandrian Library?
More or less. After the death of Alexander the Great, his possessions, among which there were many books, were brought back to Alexandria, the city in Egypt, which the young king meant to be the capital of his newly conquered world. The books, including the mirror, were later inherited by King Ptolemy of Egypt. Fortunately for everyone, he didn't know what the mirror was, and after Ptolemy built his famous library, he placed Alexander's books there. And so it was there that the mirror was discovered by one of the librarians. The man realized eventually how dangerous this book could be in the hands of some power-hungry ruler, and when, some years later, the Alexandrian Brotherhood escaped the burning city, they took the mirror with them. The more Dr. Barnaby talked about the mirror, the more relaxed Hoggie became. No, she was thinking, this was not a man who would steal, murder, and kidnap to get what he wanted. True, Dr. Barnaby was looking for the book. Still, it didn't sound like he wanted it in order to become rich or powerful, or to hurt others. While she was thus thinking, the scholar's partner, the one who at first had stayed by the entrance to the room, left his post, and slowly walked down the aisle. As he came closer, Hoggie suddenly recognized him as the tall, gaunt man she and Scooter had seen in the circus. Immediately, her fears were back.
"Dr. Barnaby," Hoggie asked, "if I gave you the mirror, what would you do with it?"
Dr. Barnaby paused. "That is an excellent question, Hoggie. To be perfectly honest, I don't know. I haven't thought of it yet. All this time I have been too preoccupied with not letting the mirror fall into the wrong hands." That was a very vague answer in Hoggie's opinion, and because of that, her fears grew ever more.
"Who was the man the police found in your hotel room?"
she blurted out suddenly. Dr. Barnaby shrugged. "I have no idea." Hoggie's fears grew more still. How can one not know who stays in one's hotel room?
"Where is my aunt?"
she demanded. "She is in a safe place," Dr. Barnaby replied calmly. "You needn't worry about her."
"Well, I do worry about her,"
Hoggie retorted,
"and I'm not giving you anything until I see her."
She clutched the mirror to her chest once again. Dr. Barnaby studied Hoggie's face, and the book she was holding. Then just as calmly he said, "It seems to me, Hoggie, that you are under some serious misapprehension. Several misapprehensions, as a matter of fact. You seem to believe that I murdered that man in the hotel, and abducted your aunt. You also seem to believe that the book you are holding is the mirror."
"Ha!"
Hoggie said defiantly.
"And it seems to me that you did murder that man, and that you did kidnap Aunt Michelle. And I know for a fact that this book is—"
She opened the book, looked at it, and finished her angry speech in a rather unexpected way.
"A fake!"
In disbelief, Hoggie stared at the pictures of farmers in columns of text written in a strange language. It was the very book she and Scooter had found in the wall safe in the secret library, and later had given to the kidnappers. But how did this book find its way back to her? And where was the real mirror? Hoggie's mind was racing. Ever since the company left the pawn-shop, she had never once let the remarkable book out of her hands, except for when she collided with the book-cart.
"Jimmy!"
Hoggie cried. At the mention of the librarian, Dr. Barnaby suddenly became very worried. "Jimmy Krantz, the young man who works here at the library? You saw him earlier?"
"I did,"
Hoggie replied, still confused. "How long ago?"
15 minutes or so."
"Where did he go?"
"I don't know. He took the elevator."
Without another word, Dr. Barnaby walked out of the room as quickly as his maimed leg would let him. The gaunt man followed him. Hoggie trotted after them.
Dr. Barnaby reached the bottom of the stairs on the first floor, just as Hoggie's friends came out of their hiding-places.
"Gentlemen," Dr. Barnaby told them, "I realize that you must have a lot of questions, and I promise that I will answer them in due time. But right now we have a more urgent problem. Jimmy Krantz has the mirror. It is important that we find him as soon as possible."
Hoggie's friends looked at her inquiringly. She nodded. She still did not understand what was happening, but one thing was quite clear to her. While helping her off the floor in the science section, Jimmy had replaced the mirror with another book.
"Has anybody seen Jimmy leave?"
Dr. Barnaby asked.
"I haven't,"
Brick said. He had been guarding the west exit, and not one person had walked past him.
"He didn't leave through the main door,"
Prospero assured them. Suddenly they all realized that Scooter was missing.
"Where is he?"
Hoggie asked.
"He was watching the north exit," Prospero said. "The one by the elevators."
Dr. Barnaby and the gaunt man hurried to the north exit, Hoggie, Prospero, and Brick closely behind them. The service door on the library's north side opened to a wide stone porch, which now resembled a small pier. Lying on the edge of the porch was Scooter's backpack.
"Look!"
Brick cried suddenly, pointing at an object in the middle of the street, some 15 blocks south, moving away quickly. The gaunt man took out of his pocket what appeared to be some sort of optical device, pressed it against one of his protruding eyes, and studied the distant object.
"It's him," he announced. "He stole our rowboat, and he has the boy."
Hoggie grabbed the device out of the man's hands, and peered at the boat. Through the powerful lens, she could see Jimmy sitting with his face towards her, his arms and shoulders moving back and forth as they turned the oars. She couldn't see Scooter at first, but upon a more careful look, she spotted the boy wriggling on the boat's floor, his hands tied behind his back, a strip of duct tape over his mouth.
"We must catch him before he reaches the river," the gaunt man said. "If he gets hold of one of the motor boats, we'll never see him again. Do you have a boat?"
Prospero had hidden his gondola by the main entrance. He fetched it, and moments later the company was well in pursuit. Prospero took one of the poles, the gaunt man picked up another, and between the two of them they gave the gondola such a speed, it soon began to catch up with Jimmy's boat.
"I don't understand,"
Hoggie said, watching the distant boat ahead navigate through the flooded city.
"Why would Jimmy steal the mirror from me? I understand why other people want it, but why him? How does he know what the book is?"
"Oh, but he has known about the mirror all along," Dr. Barnaby explained. "He has been looking for it for 10 years now. Jimmy's real name is Nicholas Mem, and you may not know it, but he is the world's most notorious book thief. He has stolen hundreds of rare and valuable books from dozens of private homes, monasteries, museums, and he even secured vaults of the planet's best-guarded banks. At some point in his criminal career, he learned about the mirror. He then dedicated his life to finding the book. The trail eventually led him to London. He was hoping that Alexander Libri's granddaughter still had the mirror in her library."
"Here's the man who wanted to buy Catherine's books,"
Hoggie guessed.
"and after she refused, he broke into her house."
Dr. Barnaby nodded.
"That does sound like Nicholas. I suppose he realized eventually that the book was no longer in the architect's house. He also guessed correctly that it was hidden in the city library. After that, he spent several months trying to find Libri's secret room. And then he discovered that you and Scooter had also been looking for the mirror, and that you had found it. How did he learn that? I'm afraid I do not yet know."
"But how do you know the rest?"
"I have been following Nicholas's exploits for years," Dr. Barnaby said grimly. "You see, Hoggie, before this man turned a book thief, he was one of my students. I've been keeping an eye on him ever since the day he learned of the mirror. I knew this book would prove too much of a temptation for him, and I was determined not to let him lay his hands on it, because—" Dr. Barnaby smiled. "In spite of whatever doubts you may have about me, Hoggy, I am the good guy. I have been a member of the Society of Saint Jerome for most of my life, and, just as Alexander Libri and other men and women before me, I have spent most of my life protecting the mirror and other of the world's most precious books from selfish, dishonest, and greedy individuals. After Nicholas's and my last encounter, which took place in the city of Alexandria, and which nearly cost me my life, and left me forever crippled," Dr. Barnaby pointed at his leg and his walking-stick, "I traced him to London. I did not know until just recently what identity he had assumed this time, but I was sure that he was looking for Alexander Libri's secret collection, and that he and I were thus in a race to find it first." Hoggy reflected on this piece of information for a few seconds.
"Edward Barnaby? Was he your grandfather?"
"He was indeed."
"And it was he who told you about the secret library?"
"He did. But how did you—"
Dr. Barnaby was genuinely surprised.
"We read his letters to Alexander Libri,"
Hoggy explained.
"Well done."
Dr. Barnaby made a gesture, as if he was tipping his hat to Hoggy.
"And how did you learn that Nicholas was Jimmy?"
"Ah, that."
Dr. Barnaby half turned to the gaunt man, who, with the strength astonishing in a man so thin, was propelling the gondola down the street.
"Meet Mr. Valentine Macdermid, London's finest private detective."
Macdermid turned around, and brought his right hand to his temple in a brief salute.
"I knew that Nicholas Mem would eventually try to weasel his way into the public library, and so I asked Mr. Macdermid to investigate discreetly every man with access to the sections of the library that were off-limits to regular patrons, librarians, security guards, delivery truck drivers. I also asked him to keep an eye on you and Scooter while I was out of town, just in case."
"Scooter caught your detective following him," Hoggy chuckled. "He thought he was being stalked."
Dr. Barnaby smiled.
"Well, even the best of us make mistakes. To Mr. Macdermid's credit, it was he who eventually discovered that Jimmy wasn't Jimmy. And so, earlier today, the two of us went to the librarian's house in hope of catching Nicholas Mem there. We did not find Nicholas, but we did find the real Jimmy Crance, a young man who came to London last spring to start his new job at the library, but instead became Nicholas Mem's hostage. The librarian has been imprisoned in his own house for the last 7 months, while Nicholas has been impersonating him. We also found your aunt."
"Aunt Michelle?"
This was the best news Hoggy had heard in days.
"Is she all right?"
"She is,"
Dr. Barnaby assured the girl,
"if a bit sleepy. We think Nicholas has been drugging her and Jimmy Crance, so they wouldn't try to run away. Your aunt had overheard Nicholas talk to you, however. She did not know what the kidnapper wanted, but she knew that the two of you would be meeting this afternoon at the library."
And so the mirror did work after all, Hoggy realized. She wished she had heard the news before she brought the book to the library.
"As soon as your aunt and Jimmy Crance were taken care of,"
Dr. Barnaby continued in the meantime,
"Macdermid and I rushed to the library. Unfortunately, we were too late."
By then, the distance between the boat and the gondola had shrunk so much, Hoggy could see the angry, desperate expression on Nicholas Mem's face. His boat might have been lighter than the clumsy gondola, but he was the only one rowing it. He was visibly tired. It also didn't help that Scooter, as soon as he noticed his friend's pursuit, started rocking the boat and kicking Nicholas's knees and elbows, and slowing the boat in any other way he could. For a second, Nicholas Mem stopped rowing and looked around. He was still a long way from the river. He would never reach it in time. Suddenly, he steered his boat into a nearby alley.
"What is he doing?"
Macdermid grunted. But already, the next moment, Nicholas's plan became clear to all of them, as they saw the book-thief direct his boat towards the fire-stairs attached to the outer wall of the nearest building. He could not evade his pursuers by water, but he might be able to make his getaway along the city's roofs. Quickly Nicholas climbed the fire-stairs all the way to the top of the building, dragging Scooter with him. With the doubled speed, Prospero and Macdermot poled the gondola into the alley. Another moment, and the detective grabbed the bottom rung of the fire-stairs. "Quick!" he barked. "If he goes inside one of the buildings, we'll never find him." Hoggie had seen Prospero perform some pretty cool things during his shows, but what he did that afternoon was truly amazing. His hands barely touching the stairs railing, he thrust his entire body upward, grabbed the railing on the next floor with his feet, and swung upward again, this time grabbing the stairs with his hands. He then repeated the stunt again and again. Macdermot, Hoggie, Brick, and Dr. Barnaby, in that order, were still struggling past the first flight of stairs when the acrobat reached the roof. When, at last, Hoggie too scrambled onto the rooftop, she suddenly felt dizzy. They were at least 20 metres above the ground now, their gondola down below, a mere leaf bobbing on the water. All around them there was shallow sea. The Thames had spilled over as far as one's eye could reach. Hoggie turned west and saw, at a distance, high above the roofs, the Dragon soaring. An Air Force helicopter appeared to be trying to scare it off. But the Dragon wasn't scared. When the helicopter got too close, the Dragon hit it with its tail, as if it were a badminton birdie. Its blades bent, its engine making ominous noises, the helicopter retreated. Brick, who had also been watching this scene, swallowed noisily. They were in Covent Garden now. The houses here were all roughly the same height, and stood so close to each other, their roofs made up a wide, unobstructed avenue of tile and bitumen, with occasional patches of aluminium. From the top of the fire-stairs, Hoggie could see Nicholas Mem, Scooter, slumped over his shoulder, mincing through a grove of TV antennas towards the city's southern edge, pigeons and seagulls scattering out of his way. Prospero was right on the book-thief's heels, his lean, powerful body resembling an engine's piston in motion.
"Come on, Brick!"
Hoggie cried. The children joined the pursuit. If anyone were watching the scene from a distance, they would find it quite amusing. There was Nicholas, hopping from roof to roof, and then there was Prospero, leaping over the skylights and swinging on the TV cables. Then there was Macdermot, stomping on the aluminium sheets, then Hoggie and Brick, inching along the ridge of a roof, and finally there was Dr. Barnaby, dragging his leg. The distance between Nicholas and Prospero was shortening rapidly. Suddenly, Hoggie saw the book-thief stop abruptly, and turn around to face the company. She could not yet see this, but the man had come upon a rather serious obstacle. The next house in the row was not only several metres away, it was also a good 2 stories shorter. It was quite a gap, but Nicholas Mem, who was in excellent physical shape, would have no difficulty in closing it safely, had he not had a hostage with him. Frantically, Nicholas considered his options. In the meantime, Prospero caught up with the book-thief at last. Macdermot was just 50 metres away. Suddenly, Nicholas made a decision. With one swift movement, he rolled Scooter off his shoulder, grabbed the boy by the collar, and shoved him to the very edge of the roof. "Come any closer, and he dies," he said to Prospero. Prospero stopped short. "Come on," he tried. "You are not really going to hurt the child, are you?" Nicholas Mem did not reply, and this silence, along with the increasingly grim expression on Macdermot's face, made Prospero wonder if he was wrong. "All right," he said, raising his hands and taking a few steps back. Just then, Hoggie and Brick caught up with Prospero and Macdermot, and stood beside them, gasping, both for shortage of breath and out of terror. For a few seconds, the adversaries eyed each other in silence. "Well," Nicholas said at last, "it seems we have reached a stalemate." "Game is over, Mem," Macdermot barked. "You've lost. So, let go of the boy, and come with us quietly." Nicholas smiled.
I don't think so. I've come too long a way to get what I wanted, and now that I finally have it," he patted his pocket, from which the edge of the mirror was sticking out, "I'm certainly not giving up. So, my dear friend, the game is far from over. Now, there are only two ways for me off this roof. I can walk off, or I can jump off. Which one will it be? Keep in mind, though, that I will be taking the boy with me."
The detective considered this for a moment.
"Fine,"
he said, stepping aside and gesturing towards the door that led to the building's attic.
"Go. You can keep the book. Just leave the boy." "I will keep the book," Nicholas replied, "with or without your permission. But I will also keep the boy. It looks as if it is going to be a long and dangerous journey. I want to take out some insurance."
MacDermid frowned.
"I can't let you do it."
He took a small step towards the thief. Mem's eyes narrowed.
"Oh, really?"
Suddenly, he shoved Scooter even closer towards the gap, so that the boy was now barely touching the edge of the roof with his tiptoes. Hoggie and Brick screamed.
"Back off, all of you," Nicholas hissed, "or he'll take a plunge."
For a moment, it seemed that something horrible was about to happen. But just then, they heard heavy breathing and stomping, and a moment later Dr. Barnaby's massive figure appeared from behind the chimney.
"Hello, Nicholas," the scholar said. "Professor?"
Mem was stunned.
"You're alive?" "Yes," Dr. Barnaby replied. "It is the second time today people tell me that."
He observed Scooter's frantic efforts not to fall off the roof, and added calmly,
"Why won't you move Scooter away from the edge? It is quite dangerous. We are not going to attack you. You have my word."
He sat down on the edge of a cable box, set his walking stick in front of him, and placed both his hands atop its handle. The scholar's words and demeanour appeared to have a soothing effect on Nicholas. He stepped away from the edge, to Scooter's and everyone else's great relief, and even managed to smile.
"I must say I am impressed, Professor. It is the second time you show up just after I presumed you dead. You're like a phoenix."
He studied the archaeographer with certain admiration. Dr. Barnaby, too, eyed his former student with interest.
"I am rather impressed myself. It wasn't an easy task you took upon yourself 10 years ago. I have to admit I didn't think you would get very far, but there you are, at the end of your journey." "I am." Nicholas grinned smugly, and once again patted the book in his pocket. "I seem to recall our last meeting, during which you said I'd never find this book." "I was wrong,"
Dr. Barnaby admitted.
"I think I have a pretty good idea as to how you traced the Libris to England, but please tell me, how did you learn about the secret library?"
"Ha!" Nicholas snorted. "Oh, that was really dumb luck. I knew by then that the book was no longer in the architect's house. I thought that perhaps Libri had given it to someone else. I was ready to leave London when one day, as I was doing research in the city library, I discovered a secret passage."
"A secret passage?"
Hoggie and Dr. Barnaby uttered at once. Scooter would have probably said that too, if he didn't have the duct tape over his mouth. "Oh, yes. I must tell you that whole place is like a big book of puzzles. The secret passage is in the science section behind the portrait of Walter Scott. There is a tiny pedal in the floor under the portrait. If you step on it, a hidden door opens in the wall, and a passage takes you to the basement."
"That's how the ransom disappeared,"
Hoggie gasped.
"You were hiding behind the portrait, and you took the book as soon as I turned my back to it."
"Guilty as charged,"
Nicholas admitted. Hoggie thought about it for another second.
"And that is how that ghost disappeared, the night Scooter and I were at the library. It wasn't a ghost at all. It was you."
Nicholas laughed. "Oh, the good old ghost of the Librarian. I must confess I started that rumour."
"You did?"
Oh, yes. It helped to keep the night guards from wandering around the library while I was doing some exploring. Anyway," Nicholas continued, "I thought then, if the library has one secret passage, why not another? And so I measured the library inside and outside, and discovered that several hundred square metres of space were missing. That confirmed my suspicion. There was a secret room somewhere in that building, perhaps more than one." "I suppose it helped your examination of the library when you installed yourself in it as the new librarian, Jimmy Crantz," Dr. Barnaby noted pensively. "That poor oaf," Nicholas nodded. "It was indeed quite fortunate that I ran into him in a local bookshop. He had just come to London to start his new job at the library. He had no friends or family in the city. Even the administration of the library didn't know what he looked like. The opportunity was too good to miss. Soon after I started my search, I acquired from the Museum of London the library's original plans," he continued.
"Acquired?"
"Humph!" Hoggy produced a snort of contempt.
"Stole?"
"All right, I stole them," Nicholas admitted. "On those plans there were several unused spaces that could house any number of books. One of the spaces was on the building's ground floor, right between children's books and fiction. The only question was, how did one get there? I searched the entire library for another hidden door. No result. In the end, I realized that the only way for me to get into the chamber would be to break in. Since I could not break in through the walls, I decided to break in through the floor. And so I employed the help of an unscrupulous shopkeeper to help me dig a tunnel from his shop straight to the chamber. I told him and his crony that the chamber was where the library was hiding its most valuable books, and that they could have all of them, with the exception of the mirror."
"Jonathan Brickenhoff and Danny Dudd!"
Hoggy exclaimed. She suddenly understood where the mounds of soil in the pawnshop had come from, what was in the sacks she had once seen the shop owner sneak out of the shop, and what those noises she and Scooter had heard during their night in the stores were. Brickenhoff and Danny were digging a tunnel to the library. Nicholas studied Hoggy with curiosity.
"You really are quite good," he stated. "I guess that explains why Barnaby hired the two of you to help him find the mirror. Although, I admit when I first learned about it, I thought the man had gone batty, recruiting school students to search for the world's most important book." "By the way," Dr. Barnaby asked, "how did you know that Hoggie and Scooter were also looking for the mirror?" "They left your business card in the Adventures of Till Eulenspiegel," Nicholas explained. "When I first saw it, I could not believe my eyes. The man I thought was rotting away in a stone well in Alexandria was actually alive and well. I even went to the Luxembourg Hotel to check if a scholar by the name of Barnaby was indeed staying there, and they confirmed it. I was convinced of your miraculous resurrection even more when, as I was snooping around your room, our mutual friends Hoggie and Scooter came to visit you."
Nicholas Mem laughed at this curious and fortunate coincidence. Hoggy gasped.
"It was you in Dr. Barnaby's room that night?"
"It was, indeed,"
Nicholas replied, in a deep voice that sounded just like Dr. Barnaby's.
"From that day on, I watched your young assistants closely. I was right behind them when they found the entrance to the secret library, in a place I never thought it would be. Sadly, I couldn't follow them inside the library. The entrance was too small. When the children went to see you at the hotel again, I realized that they must have found the book. I then sneaked into Hoggie's apartment, but didn't find anything. And when I tried to break into Scooter's house, the dog made such a racket, I was certain the neighbours would call the police."
"The dog?" Hoggy was confused by this part of Mem's story. Scooter figured it out before she did. He forced through the duct tape. Everybody stared at the boy with concern.
"I think he is trying to say, General, good Dodo," Hoggy realized suddenly.
Scooter confirmed her guess with enthusiastic nodding of the head. Everyone except the two of them was quite puzzled by this comment.
"Anyway," Nicholas concluded, "after the fire in the hotel, I couldn't afford to wait any longer. I figured, why should I follow the kids, waiting for a slim chance of retrieving the book, when I can just have them bring it to me?" "That was when you decided to kidnap Michelle Clares," Dr. Barnaby announced. "We found her," the scholar then said, "and Jimmy Krantz, too. I cannot believe you would gamble with two innocent people's lives like this. Jimmy Krantz will take months to recover his health, and he will probably never regain his good name."
Nicholas shrugged.
"Perhaps you can think of it as a life lesson. One way or another, you have your hostages and I have my book. And now I'd like to bid you all farewell. So if you could just step away from that door so that my young friend and I could pass through." "Surely you're not thinking about taking Scooter with you, Nicholas?" "I am. Don't worry. I won't keep him forever. You can have him back once I'm safe." "But you are never safe, Nicholas." The scholar shook his head. "The things you do are destructive to your own life as well as the lives of others. I cannot allow you to take Scooter with you. Let him go. You have the mirror. It will protect you."
Nicholas considered this for a moment.
"Sorry, but no," he said. "I have to be certain that I will get out of London all right. For all I know, there are 100 cops waiting for me at the bottom of this staircase, and they will be upon me before I ever have a chance to use the book. Now, step aside."
Dr. Barnaby did not move. Macdermot and Prospero, too, stood in front of the book-thief, unyielding as a stone wall. Seeing this, Mem once again moved towards the gap, dragging Scooter with him.
"Don't be fools," he said through his teeth. "Step aside, or I'll jump. You nasty little—"
Macdermot made a step towards Mem, who quickly shoved Scooter to the edge of the roof.
"Mm-hmm,"
the boy yelled. It's impossible to say what would have happened next, if Hoggie didn't cry out suddenly,
"Wait! Wait, everybody! I have an idea."
The men froze and stared at her.
"Nicholas,"
Hoggie said,
"would you let Scooter go? If you could get out of London safely and so quickly, no one would even try to follow you."
"Sure,"
the book-thief replied.
"But unless you have a private plane, Hoggie, I don't see how it is possible."
"I have something better than a plane,"
Hoggie said. She turned to the west and pointed at the dragon, fighting off another helicopter at a distance.
"That dragon,"
she said.
"I can tell you how to summon him, and make him take you wherever you want."
Nicholas considered this for a moment. Ordinarily, anyone offered a ride on a dragon would laugh at the deal, but then again, ordinarily, dragons do not soar over city roofs.
"All right," he said at last. "Tell me."
And so Hoggie taught Nicholas Mem the Dragon King's incantation she had found in the Narucan.
"And you really think it'll work?"
Nicholas asked sceptically. Hoggie shrugged.
"If it doesn't, you're not losing anything, are you?"
Nicholas considered this.
"No, I suppose I'm not."
He then turned toward the western horizon, and in a loud and clear voice recited,
"Kalinar e Sadazar, Barium Kivalu, Ivina Far Lucida, Davanam Uvaru."
For a moment, Hoggie thought with despair that nothing was going to happen. But the next moment, as the wind carrying the magical words reached the dragon, the creature suddenly lost all interest in the helicopter. He circled the sky, and perched on one of the nearby roofs, his long neck stretched towards the east.
"Call him again,"
Hoggie urged the book-thief. Nicholas repeated the incantation. This time the dragon responded to the call with a mighty roar, although Hoggie wasn't sure if roar would be the right name for it. Never before, and never after, did she come across a creature, a machine, or a device of any sort that could make such a sound. It was so powerful, it shattered the window-panes in all of Covent Garden. Hoggy felt hairs on her skin stand up on their ends, but her fear was nothing compared to the utter terror they all, including the usually unruffled Macdermot, felt the next moment, as the dragon took off again and flew towards them. With every stroke of its massive wings, the monster grew bigger and bigger. When it finally reached the building, and landed on the western edge of the roof, its mountain-like body completely blocked the sun. One sweep of his tail, and he cleared the roof flat of the chimneys and TV antennas. His sapphire eyes glistening, the dragon surveyed the people on the roof. They cowered as far away from the monster as they could. Only Nicholas, his vice-like hand still clutching Scooter's shoulder, remained motionless. The book thief was beginning to realize that he, indeed, held the beast as his servant. It appeared also that the dragon, in his turn, knew who his master was. With reverence, he bowed his enormous head to Nicholas Mem, and spread his wing before him. Unhurriedly, the book thief walked up the wing to the dragon's back. He sat down between the crests of the dragon's back, and looked down upon the people on the roof, and the devastated city below. They all seemed so small and insignificant now. Suddenly, Nicholas Mem laughed. He pushed away his hostage, who rolled down the dragon's wing, and landed at his friend's feet, and without another word, not even a word of contempt to his old adversary Dr. Barnaby, spurred the dragon. The monster sprang into the sky. Hoggy and Prospero rushed to free Scooter from his bonds. The rest of the company, shielding their eyes from the powerful gusts of wind produced by the dragon's wings, watched the monster and his rider disappear into the southern horizon.
"Oh, Scooter!"
Hoggy said, taking the duct tape off her friend's mouth.
"I was so worried about you."
"Are you all right, Scooter?"
Dr. Barnaby asked, helping Scooter to his feet.
"I'm fine." "In that case, we should hurry down. First, we must get you, Hoggy, and your friend to a safe place, and then I must find a phone or a telegraph or some other way of contacting the society. I must warn them about Nicholas Mem. I must tell them that he has the mirror. It really is a disaster. The world's most powerful, most dangerous book, in the hands of that maniac. Imagine what he'll do with it."
Hoggy and Scooter exchanged a mischievous glance.
"Oh, I wouldn't worry about that,"
Hoggy said. Nicholas Mem landed on the side of a giant mountain in the heart of the Himalayas. He was thousands of miles away from any human dwelling. He wanted to be completely alone. That way he would not be interrupted, as he finally unveiled the mystery of the mirror, and used the book to change the world according to his will. He released the dragon, and for a few minutes watched the magical creature snake through the sky, growing more and more distant. He then took a long, deep breath of fresh mountain air, and surveyed the beautiful snow peaks around him. All of them belonged to him now, and so did the vast world beyond them. He took the mirror out of the pocket, and affectionately stroked its subtle brown cover. He then opened the book, and cried in astonishment and horror. The mirror was but a shell, inside which there was a heap of yellowish powder and paper bits, and amidst the paper bits a large worm was munching on whatever was left of the world's greatest book. Caught in the act, the bookworm hurried to the edge of the book, dropped onto the ground, and crawled under a nearby rock. His fingers shaking, Nicholas Mem scooped the paper bits into the palm of his hand, and brought them closer to his eyes. The object of his deepest desires for the last 10 years, his dreams and ambitions, they were nothing but dust now. And the next moment, a sudden breeze took it off his hand, and scattered it over the mountains. Nicholas Mem dropped the book cover, raised his fists to the sky, and cursed.